The black man sat in complete silence as the racist officer swore an oath, spewing lie after lie, each one more absurd than the last. The jury listened, the judge listened, but then, one revelation shattered the entire courtroom. In an instant, the cop's face drained of color, his once unshakable confidence crumbled into dust. When the truth finally struck, it hit like a hammer. His entire world crumbled before everyone's eyes. The courtroom was drowning in a silence so heavy you could almost feel it pressing against your chest, suffocating, like the air itself had stopped moving. It wasn't a peaceful kind of quiet. No, this was tension so thick, it felt like it could crush you. Malcolm Hayes sat at the defendant's table, his hands tightly clenched, knuckles turning a ghostly white from the pressure. His heart raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. But his face? It remained calm, as if he had learned to mask every ounce of emotion. He had learned early on that showing emotion as a black man in a courtroom could be dangerous, a risk no one should take. Across from him, Officer Daniel Briggs sat confidently on the witness stand, his uniform sharp, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. But his words were anything but clean. "I saw the defendant flee the scene," Officer Briggs declared, his voice firm, unwavering. "He was aggressive, resisting arrest. We found stolen merchandise in his vehicles." Lies. Every single word of it was a lie. Malcolm's mother, sitting just behind him, stifled a quiet sob. She knew her son. He wasn't perfect, but damn it, he wasn't a criminal. She had raised him to be respectful, to keep his head down, to survive in a world that seemed determined to see him fail. And now here he was, fighting for his freedom, while a racist cop twisted the truth right in front of their eyes. The prosecutor, barely even questioning Briggs, nodded along, barely a hint of skepticism. It was routine, another black man, another guilty verdict waiting to happen. But Malcolm's lawyer, Vanessa Carter, wasn't going to let it slide. With a controlled fury, she rose from her seat, heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Her eyes were burning with a fire that could melt steel. "Officer Briggs," she began, her voice smooth but edged with steel, "are you absolutely certain about what you saw that night?" Briggs exhaled sharply. "I wouldn't be testifying under oath if I wasn't, ma'am." Malcolm didn't flinch. Inside, however, the anger burned deep. He knew he had been at home that night. He had proof. But the system wasn't built to listen to people like him. No, it was built to trust the words of men like Officer Briggs. Vanessa, however, wasn't rattled. She moved closer, each step deliberate, her heels echoing like the ticking of a time bomb in the tense silence. "You say my client resisted arrest," she continued, her voice slicing through the tension like a knife. "Did your body camera capture this?" Briggs hesitated, his confidence faltering. It was malfunctioning," he admitted, his voice less sure now. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Malcolm shut his eyes for just a second. Of course. How convenient. But what Briggs didn't know was that the next 5 minutes would change everything. The truth wasn't just coming, it was about to crash down on him with such force that he'd never be the same again. A hush fell over the courtroom, so thick you could feel it in your bones. Even Judge Reynolds, who had barely looked up from his notes, glanced toward Officer Briggs now. "Your body camera was malfunctioning?" he asked, his voice betraying an edge of doubt. Malcolm inhaled slowly, his fingers pressing flat against the cold table. He knew how this worked. The words of a police officer, especially a white one, would always carry more weight than the truth of a black man. Vanessa, however, wasn't backing down. She took another step forward, her heels echoing once more, deliberately slow, letting the tension stretch. "Officer Briggs," she repeated, tilting her head slightly, "your body camera malfunctioned?" "How unfortunate." Briggs nodded, but Malcolm saw it. A crack in his confidence, a flicker of something in his expression, just for a second. It didn't go unnoticed. Not by Vanessa, and certainly not by Malcolm. Vanessa didn't give him a chance to recover. Sliding a piece of paper onto the evidence table, she continued, her voice smooth and deadly calm. "It's a good thing you weren't the only officer on duty that night." Briggs stiffened. His once relaxed posture shifted, his hand twitching nervously at his side. Vanessa let the moment hang in the air, stretching it out until it felt like the courtroom might break under the weight of it. "We pulled the footage from Officer Grant's body camera," she said, her voice now silky, controlled, sharp. "Funny thing is, his camera worked just fine." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Malcolm's mother let out a quiet gasp, her grip tightening on the arms of her seat. She had spent her entire life preparing her son for moments like this, for a fight he never should have had to fight in the first place. But now, just maybe, the tides were beginning to turn. Briggs stiffened, his posture no longer relaxed. His hand twitched again. The cracks in his facade were widening. Vanessa didn't let him off the hook. "Would you like me to play the footage, Officer Briggs?" she asked, her eyes locked onto his, unblinking. The silence in the courtroom became almost suffocating. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Judge Reynolds, for the first time, sat up straighter, folding his hands in front of him, his attention now fully on the situation. Briggs swallowed hard, his face pale. I don't see how that's necessary," he stammered, but it was already too late. Vanessa turned, giving a slight nod to the courtroom technician. The screen at the front of the room flickered to life, and Officer Briggs' face turned ashen. Then, the truth spilled out for everyone to see. The screen came alive, and suddenly, the entire courtroom was watching as the footage began to play. Malcolm's heart raced in his chest as the grainy image from Officer Grant's body camera came into focus. The setting was unmistakable, a quiet, dimly lit neighborhood street, flickering street lamps casting shadows on the pavement. It was the night Malcolm had been arrested. Vanessa stood, arms crossed, watching Briggs carefully. He was shifting now, his confidence cracking like fragile ice under too much pressure. At first, the audio was filled with static and the low hum of the police radio. But then, clear as day, Officer Briggs' voice rang out through the speakers, the same words that had been spoken in the courtroom just moments ago. "That's him right there. Black hoodie, hands in." The rest of the sentence was about to expose the biggest lie of all. His pockets looked suspicious as hell. A beat of silence echoed through the courtroom, thick and heavy, like the air had turned into something solid. Malcolm closed his eyes, his mind racing back to that night. He had been walking home from a friend's house, nothing more. But in Officer Briggs' eyes, that had been more than enough. On the video, another officer's voice came through, Officer Grant, trying to inject some sanity into the situation. "Briggs, slow down, that guy's just walking," he said. But Briggs wasn't listening. Briggs interrupted him, his voice dripping with arrogance. "They always act innocent. Watch this." The courtroom shifted, a collective gasp escaping from the audience. Some jurors exchanged nervous glances. Even the judge's expression darkened, like he could already feel what was coming. But nothing could prepare anyone for the worst part. On the screen, Briggs stepped out of the patrol car. The footage showed Malcolm, completely unaware, wearing headphones, just walking down the street. He wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he was simply existing. Then, Briggs' voice echoed again, louder now, full of command. "Hey, hands where I can see them." Malcolm, startled by the sudden command, froze.
"What?
Before he could even finish the sentence, the video showed Briggs grabbing him roughly and slamming him against the hood of the patrol car. The sickening sound of Malcolm groaning in pain echoed through the room, sending a ripple of discomfort through everyone watching. But it was what happened next that would haunt them all. Briggs leaned in close to Malcolm's ear, his voice low but full of menace, and the mic on Officer Grant's vest picked up every word with chilling clarity. "You move an inch, boy, and I'll make sure you don't walk away from this." The courtroom reacted in unison, a collective gasp, and someone in the back cursed under their breath. Malcolm's mother clutched her chest, her head shaking in disbelief. Briggs' face had gone ashen, his pride and confidence now evaporating in the face of the undeniable truth. Vanessa let the video play just a few seconds longer, just long enough to reveal the damning reality. There was no resisting, no stolen merchandise, no crime, just a man walking home. and a police officer who saw his very skin as a weapon. Vanessa turned slowly to face the judge, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Your Honor," she began, her words sharp and precise, "the prosecution has built this entire case on the testimony of this officer, an officer who not only lied under oath, but was also caught on video using threats and excessive force against an innocent man." She turned back to face Briggs, whose hands were visibly shaking now. "Tell me, Officer Briggs," she said, her voice dripping with steel, "do you still stand by your statement?" The courtroom fell into an oppressive silence. All eyes were fixed on Officer Briggs. In that moment, everyone could see it. His life had just collapsed, right in front of their eyes, in real time. Briggs' throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape that wasn't there. His once steady hands gripped the witness stand so tightly, his knuckles turned stark white. Malcolm's heart raced in his chest, his fists clenched beneath the table. This was it. This was the moment that could either break him or finally set him free. Vanessa stepped closer, her heels clicking with slow precision, each step heightening the tension. "I'll ask again, Officer Briggs," she said, her voice like a sharp knife cutting through the thick air. "Do you still stand by your statement?" Briggs opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His lips parted, his jaw tightened, but the words refused to come. Malcolm could see the sweat gathering at his temple, the way his chest rose and fell with shallow, shaky breaths. The man was cornered. The judge leaned forward, his expression now one of grave concern. "Officer Briggs," Judge Reynolds said, his voice laced with authority, "I remind you that you are under oath." Briggs' fingers twitched, his leg bouncing nervously under the stand. He glanced towards the prosecution table, but no one came to his aid. Even the prosecutor, who had been so eager to paint Malcolm as a criminal, was sitting frozen now, lips pressed tight in a thin line. They all knew. Briggs licked his lips, his face ghostly pale. His voice cracked, and he struggled to regain composure, but it was too late. Vanessa didn't move, didn't blink. She waited, letting the weight of his lie crush him in real time. And then, finally, Briggs broke. I might have," he stammered, his eyes flicking toward the screen where his own words, his own damning testimony, still echoed in everyone's ears. Vanessa tilted her head, her gaze sharp. "You might have," she asked, the question hanging in the air. Briggs swallowed again, his breathing erratic. Malcolm could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, his body tensing in anticipation. A long pause stretched between them. Briggs' eyes flicked around the courtroom. The jury, the judge, the spectators, looking for a way out. There was none. Slowly, Briggs dropped his head. "I lied," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The courtroom exploded in a storm of gasps, murmurs, and even a shocked, "What the hell?" from somewhere in the back. Malcolm's mother sobbed, but this time, it wasn't fear, it was relief. Vanessa nodded once, as if she had expected this all along. "Speak up, Officer Briggs," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "What exactly did you lie about?" Briggs exhaled sharply, his body trembling. He looked like a man watching his entire life burn to the ground in front of him. He squeezed his eyes shut, as if hoping this was all a nightmare. But when he opened them again, the truth had already shattered his world. I lied about everything," he whispered, his voice breaking. A woman in the back gasped. A juror shook his head in disgust. Judge Reynolds' expression darkened. "Are you telling this court that you knowingly falsified your testimony?" he demanded. Briggs flinched. His career was over. "Yes, Your Honor," he admitted, his voice barely audible. Vanessa inhaled deeply, turning to the judge. "Your Honor, given this officer's admission, I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." Judge Reynolds didn't hesitate. Motion granted. Malcolm's entire body went numb. It was over. The guards at his side stepped back, and the tension that had been wound so tightly in his muscles for weeks, months, even years, began to unravel. His mother broke down in quiet sobs behind him, and Malcolm turned, his eyes burning with unshed tears, meeting her gaze. He was free. Free at last. But this wasn't the end. No, not by a long shot. What happened next, that was the part no one saw coming. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Murmurs turned into heated whispers. The sound of shuffling feet filled the air, and somewhere in the back, a reporter furiously typed on a laptop. Malcolm sat still, as if the world around him had ceased to exist. The words "motion granted" still echoed in his ears. It was over. Finally. His mother's tears, tears of relief. But this was just the beginning.